Hello and welcome to the Cardboard Herald, my chance to talk with creative gamers and game creators. As always, I'm your host, Jack, and today I have the most creative of game creators. I am joined once again by the master of the Catacombs himself, Aron West. Welcome back to the show, Aron.
How you doing, Jack?
I feel like I'm getting more radio friendly with each of my introductions here. Like I'm really ready to hit the big time or something. And next up, we have Aron West on the podcast.
Sounds good.
We're ready to rock and roll. It's actually really late over there on East Coast time, so everyone knows that if Aron starts slurring his words or anything, it's midnight over there, but it sounds like that's not too unusual of a circumstance for you, Aron. You've been burning the midnight oil working on the Catacombs lately?
Yeah, I think probably for at least 2 years now.
Yeah, it seems like it's a nonstop production there, and it's always churning out some sort of new innovation. You got, let's see, Catacombs 3rd Edition came out, and then you did a second print run of 3rd Edition, which hit last year, 2017. And then you released Castles, critical hit of 2017, Cardboard Herald's critical hit of 2017. Catacombs and Castles. Yeah, of course. It deserved it. I loved that game. And then you had, let's see, Wyverns of Wildmere just got shipped to backers, right? Was that early 18 or was that late 17?
Yeah, that was part of the overall Catacombs and Castles Kickstarter campaign.
Right. And then also the Catacombs Conquest is right around the corner. So you have been a busy dude. It's been a busy last really 2 years in general. Are you ramping up for 2018 being just as kind of haywire and crazy as last year?
I would expect so, yes. That's probably a fair assessment.
You hitting as many conventions this year? I know I saw you at both Dice Tower and PAX this last year, which were some of my first board game conventions as part of the Cardboard Herald, and it was kind of nice, meeting you there and meeting all kinds of other people, but I was surprised by how many conventions I saw were on your docket.
Yeah, that's right. We will be exhibiting at Dice Tower Con again this year, and I expect PAX Unplugged as well. Certainly will be attending Gen Con. We may exhibit at this point via our friends at the Indie Game Alliance, IGA. Origins is a bit of a question mark. It'll depend on my schedule because it looks like we're going to make the effort to go to the UK Games Expo for the first time this year and start the process of exhibiting, because we do know that we have a lot of people interested in Catacombs in the UK.
Is that logistically, like going to the US for so many conventions, is that any sort of problem? I mean, I can't imagine that there's too many border inspections going from Canada to the US, but it seems like a lot of these conventions that you're having to go to are down in the Yankee side of the border there.
Yeah, we don't usually run into any real problems. I've done my best to set things up so that I can just sail across the border without too much difficulty. So, yeah, no problems like that usually.
Okay, so like Border Patrol isn't like cracking open 100 cases of Catacombs to inspect and what's going on in each of the boxes there. What sort of contraband could be hiding within each of these Elzra boxes?
Well, they do sometimes ask questions, and especially if you're driving across the border. The last time I did it late one night in Port Huron, Michigan, I was instructed that even though I'm in a regular passenger vehicle, I have to, because I was exhibiting at a convention, I have to cross as if I was in a semi-truck. Exactly. So I'd have to cross in a semi-truck because they want me to pay a user fee of $13 for crossing the border, because this was for the purposes of trade as opposed to being a visitor. Yes. So I'm on the pre-screen list with an Nexus card. So if I'm just traveling to the U.S., I can just go through on the TSA pre-check lines or whatever.
Yeah,
but
totally.
In this case, they said, okay, no, just because you have TSA pre and you're pre-screened, and even when you're coming up to a land border, you're actually expected to pay this user fee. So anyway, that was an interesting lesson learned.
Well, I'd be interested to hear from some of the audience out there, but I know for me that one sure way in order to get my bag checked extra carefully through TSA lines is to have any sort of board game components in there. Like I feel like especially dice, but really anything that's just thick and heavy and laden with all sorts of components, TSA is going to have a heck of a time pulling through all of that, maybe even giving me the deluxe extra pat-down screening all the while, and then carefully opening up my bag and going like, what does this nerd have in here? Catacombs? What's going on with this guy?
Well, that was assuming that the box even fits through the security scanner / X-ray machine to begin with, if you were hauling it around with you.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's why Conquest is so cool, which we'll get to. It's going to be my TSA-friendly, my carry-on luggage Catacombs, so I can be propping up 2 airplane trays and seeing if I can make it work with a little bit of know-how and grit. I think I can manage something on the airplane. Actually, no, that's a terrible idea. No one should try that. So, 2017, it was a big year for you. I was just kind of looking over some of the things that you were releasing, that you were working on, some of the campaigns that were going on, and It was just kind of epic in a lot of ways. I'm wondering, was there anything particularly like the most challenging about 2017 with all these plates that you're spinning?
Well, I think when you look at where we ended up with the Kickstarter campaign, I don't think any of us here really anticipated that we would still be doing the fulfillment throughout the latter part of the year for the Catacombs and Castles campaign. That was, as I said, unexpected, and really doing our best, of course, to mitigate those delays, to work with people and to be very transparent with them about what was precipitating these delays. And in many ways, it was probably argue unavoidable. Even when you sit there and you plan one of these projects out, when you have 2 different publishers involved, 2 different languages, and just the sheer number of SKUs that we were putting through there, I think we probably overwhelmed the factory that we were working with, and as a result, that fulfillment took longer. Conversely, we were able to control it that much better, because we decided that we would not farm it out to a third-party fulfillment company for the U.S. and Canada. We rolled up our sleeves, and to continue to provide that transparency and customer support, we did it ourselves. And I think overall, when you think about the fact that several hundred people, maybe even 1,000, 1,500 people across North America that we were shipping such different package configurations to, I think overall, in terms of accuracy, we did a fairly good job. And of course, there was some people that, for one reason or another, they slipped through the cracks. And I think that's a pretty common with a lot of these types of fulfillment processes. Again, we got lists set up, and for those people that we missed, we were able to get packages out to them in short order, and then start dealing with some of the problems from a manufacturing perspective that we discovered. We'd had some hints maybe that these may blow up to be a more pervasive problem than we thought, and that in fact turned out to be true. I'm referring, for example, to some of the warped game boards that we saw in copies of Castles, copies of Catacombs, copies of Wyverns, and to a degree, it was an opportunity to demonstrate to people that we were going to stand behind the products, that we were not going to walk away from them, that we valued their support and their patience while we worked on a remediation plan, and then executed that remediation plan and really sent out these replacement game boards, no questions asked. And even if someone asked for even just one of the boards to be replaced, we wanted people to have a consistent set. So we really, I'd like to think, went the extra distance to look up and say, oh yeah, actually they ordered the ice board too. Well, there's a chance that they may want all of their games to have like a consistent surface to them, a consistent feeling to them, if you like. So we automatically sent them replacement one as part of that. So it was sort of a very much, I'd like to think anyway, a no questions asked type policy of just, okay, fill this out. If you see this problem, we were very transparent about it. We showed a picture of it on a card that we were able to deliver to people that we were fulfilling to here in North America. Of course, this was when we discovered the problem, when we had some of our fulfillment partners helping us internationally. We didn't have the visibility at that time to be able to instruct them to do the same. But we set up a very seamless, hopefully painless process as possible, just a unique URL on our website, minimal amount of information, just fill this out, and we'll send you a new set of boards. And I hope that people appreciated that. Now, of course, people will say, well, there's a whole set of other support tickets that we haven't dealt with yet. And to that, I would say, true. We have been encumbered to a degree by our ability to get those processed. It's not something that I'm going to walk away from. I will get that completed. It's part of my promise to my backers. Of course, I had my assistant Heba leave on maternity. She just had her baby girl on February 15th.
Oh, that's awesome. You tell her congratulations from me. I've never met her, but tell her congratulations all the way from Alaska.
Absolutely. Of course, the character in the Wyverns expansion, Heba, is based on her. The warrior maiden is based on her. So, big heart, loves the company, and does a fantastic job. But because we've been working on some of these other remediation challenges, I haven't been able to get her temporary replacement up to speed with some of these support type activities. So we've been working on a plan to deal now with all of the non-game board related support tickets. And we think there'll be some time now opening up on the schedule where we'll be able to get that dealt with. And we really sincerely appreciate people's patience with this. It's taken longer than we would have thought. There was a lot more tickets than we were expecting. There's been a number of issues. So but the bottom line is we're going to get to it. If you're in our database, we're going to get those sent out. It's not something that we want people to worry about. We stand behind our products. We're going to get it done.
And that's something that I really like about you and I like about Elzra as a company is that I actually believe it. I've seen the transparency in action. I've seen you at conventions. I've seen you demo to people and level with them about some of the issues that some of the components were facing. And I've seen the result of you actually getting those out into the hands of people. And while I totally understand that there are people who are upset because they want something that they backed, they want the quality of component that they were expecting, but what's refreshing is that in a world where there's a million things that can go wrong, it's not so much that something went wrong. That's the tale of the story here. The tale of the story is that you, as a very, very small company with a product that has thin margins, I mean, board games are not, $1 million businesses here for the most part. Some large companies maybe, but you are still absolutely focused on getting the right product to the consumers in any way that you can while sustaining yourself as a business. And that isn't the tale for every Kickstarter. And there's even really big companies. And, I'm certainly in a position where I feel comfortable calling out, say, like Queen Games has had a couple Kickstarters where they have just gone off the grid and not responded to anyone's inquiries about something, and they've gotten into issues with the designers of their games, particularly some of the stuff going on with the Kingdom Builders expansions that have gone on, and their response was just silence. while simultaneously listing new Kickstarters and new products. And that hasn't been you. You've been going on to podcasts. You've been coming onto this podcast. You've been at conventions. You've been the face of Elzra saying, look, I know there's a problem and here's our solution. It may not be as fast as you want it, but we are getting to every single person one at a time. And that kind of commitment, that means something to me because crap happens, mistakes happen, manufacturing issues happen. It's all about what do you do in response to that. That's the most important and most valuable thing to me as a consumer, as a media person. And of course, having good games in your hands is super important, but the fact that you care enough that you're going to take the time to make sure that people are going to get that eventual response, even if the first round wasn't exactly what people were wanting, I love it. And I think that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the only way to do it. And I hope people, believe me when I say that, if you submitted a support ticket, we're gonna get to it. And, it's just a case of dealing with this whole process one step at a time. It's a triage problem.
Yeah.
First of all, we have to identify these problems. We then also actually have to have components available to send out. So we were waiting for a large shipment to arrive from the printer in that regard. And in some cases, there was less than we were expecting. And in others, what were claimed anyway as being replacement parts didn't turn out to be replacement parts at all. So there were definitely some challenges here, even getting the parts to even be able to start the replacement process. Now,
Right.
Of course, for urgent cases, we can break down lightly damaged copies and things of that nature, which we do. Of course. It's not that I'm putting out there that this shipment of replacement parts was delayed in some way and it's some kind of an excuse. It's not true. I mean, we were processing these support tickets in the background where we could. The key thing that I think people, if they could look inside and understand what we're dealing with, is we're a very small team, and we effectively have to replace all of the game boards in all the copies of Catacombs and Wyverns before they can be sold to retail. So we didn't want people to experience this problem, who are the Kickstarter backers. Of course not. That's how we had this replacement program, and we've, for the most part, now completed that part of this remediation. Everyone that submitted a ticket to us, I'm feeling pretty confident that we've got everyone. Now, I'm sure there'll be someone that'll say, "Oh, I didn't," and we'll deal with that. There's always someone, right?
There's always someone.
Sometimes, for example, like our website, we keep debugging the code on our customs form package. We actually customized it quite a bit, but sometimes it doesn't record it properly in the database, for example. There's those types of errors. It doesn't happen very often, but you can get that 1 in 10,000 or whatever it is range of cases where you get something like that. And it's like, well, I tried to submit and it didn't work or something. But, I'd hope people would understand at this point that we would work with that person to get that corrected. But the key thing here is that we have these replacement boards now, and the games have to be remediated at a local packaging company before we can get them to retail. So that's where we're at the moment. So you can imagine that's a pretty big logistical operation. You've got to receive goods, you've got to process them, you've got to inspect them. You have to now instruct the people on the line at the packaging plant how to do this properly so they don't damage the product. They've got to be looking for damage themselves to see if a particular copy is even worth remediating. Well, after it comes out at the end of the tunnel, did it get damaged? Yes or no? I mean, most people aren't familiar probably the way shrink tunnels work and the type of film gauge that you've got to use and the heating system and all that sort of thing. So, and we won't get into any of that. But the point is that you've got a like I've been on site at this place. I've visited the shrink tunnel. I know where the games are going. I'm a very detailed-oriented person, I'd like to think. So I have to follow the whole remediation process and understand every single step of it, including, like all of the movement and who's doing what and who's paying for what and all this sort of thing. So, with Hiba not being available to assist me, my capacity to work on these very, very fine-grained support tickets has definitely been compromised. Now that we have the remediation plan in place and we're starting to execute it, and people are understanding other resources outside of Elzra are able to shoulder some of this burden for us, now it makes it a little bit easier. Not really easy, but easier to start working on some of these support tickets that do not involve anything to do with the game boards. So this is sort of gives people kind of a sense about what we've been facing here. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day to be able to work on all of these things, and when you have a key person, go on maternity leave, for example. Her replacement has been working on all of these other more pressing problems, and that whole triage word again, before we can really start focusing on the non-board related support tickets. That's sort of I would say, the sort of the most clearest, sincerest description that I could give of what's precipitated this delay with us getting to some of these support tickets.
Man, I feel like I went right out the gate for asking the really challenging stuff, and here now we can actually talk about some of the fun stuff. Like, first off,
right? Yeah. But we don't have to use the term shrink tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think this is all really important stuff, and I think it's cool stuff that is interesting, and it's something that I know that there are game designers who listen to this, people who want to self-publish their games. These are things that you have gone through the trials and tribulations that other people can learn from. So I think there is value in having that discussion, and certainly for consumers, there's value in having that discussion and hearing what some of the challenges that you're facing. But also, I mean, the reason why people may be upset or wanting something really awesome that there is at the end of the tunnel, at the end of that shrink wrap tunnel, is because there are cool games underlying it, and that is Catacombs and Castles and Catacombs Conquest, which for all you listening at home who are super envious, I have a production copy in my hands right now. Like, as we're talking, I just received it, and I'm going to be working on a review of this. And this little tiny Bad Daddy appetizer to the Catacombs world is awesome. So how thrilled are you that this thing is actually out now, or soon to be out? It's a reality. It's been through production.
Well, I think at this point, I'm not going to be thrilled until it's actually here. Because who knows what's going to happen between, where it leaves the factory door and when it finally arrives. I mean, who knows at this point? So,
yeah, well,
I'll be thrilled when it actually gets here in one piece, and then we can start the process of doing the Kickstarter fulfillment. So, yeah, of course, from a certain perspective, I mean, I've seen the production samples. Mm-hmm. The quality is very good. Obviously, we didn't use the same printer that was responsible for the last round of Catacombs printings. Mm-hmm. So that outfit, the one that did the games before, they were responsible for Gloomhaven, so we thought they were a fairly safe bet.
They just weren't up to the challenge of the Catacombs. You got a unique game on your hands. It's not like every other one out there.
And in fairness, we were using they put us in touch with a different factory than the one that produced Gloomhaven. But it was the same broker. It's the same production team that worked on it. And I don't have any. I don't have any bad blood towards them, by the way. They were just as blindsided as we were with the behavior of this of this printer that they'd had a long history working with, and things just went off the rails with this particular project. So I don't blame them. To their credit, they are working with us as part of our team to help remediate it and to solve the problems. And I appreciate that, and hope that they continue to do that. It's a small industry, and reputation's everything. So this new printer is, they've done a number of products as well, and it was the guys from Linvander with their legacy line of games. They use them, and also the other Everything Epic guys. Mm-hmm. I think their Rambo Kickstarter's finishing up right now, but they use them as well, and very, very, very happy with the quality. Well, they seem to have done a good job.
The quality is definitely awesome. Like this production copy, it feels like all of the components are much more of premium components than they have been in the past, just much more durable and that kind of thing. But components aside, it's a really fascinating game. So, correct me if I'm wrong in giving this description for the audience, but Catacombs Conquest, I've played it a couple times at this point, is more of an introduction to Catacombs. It's a 2 to 4 player team based. If you're playing with 3 or 4 people, then 2 people are teamed up on either side. And rather than traditional Catacombs where each character has their own specific unique abilities, your pieces are kind of like avatars for the various cards that are in your hands, and you are actually drawing from a deck, playing cards, and resolving whatever ability is on your card. So you're making much more tactical decisions about which cards to play now, which to save for later, and trying to account for what you're going to draw into. It's a real short, like 20 to 30 minute, vicious, strategic, and mobile Catacombs. It's like Catacombs Pocket, something that you can bring everywhere. It's easy to teach, easy to set up. It doesn't require any big boards or anything. It's a small box, and it is just something that's really quick in order to get the flavor and the concepts of Catacombs in, while still doing something that's entirely unique in the Catacombs line, having that card system, which is super cool. Do you have anything to add to that description of this before I dive into some specific Conquest-related questions?
The only thing I would add is that to my way of thinking about it is that the mobile obstacles are a unique aspect.
Oh, yeah,
with Catacombs, you have a game board, and the obstacles are fixed. With castles, we call them static obstacles. You set them up at the beginning of the game, and then they remain static the entire time. But when you play the game again, the configuration of the obstacles can be different. In this game, moving the obstacles around is part of the game, and actually a very important part of it. It's not just necessarily moving them for the purpose of cover. There's a lot of disruptive possibilities that comes from the fact that the obstacle pieces now are mobile within the defined game area.
Yeah,
that's a significant difference, at least from my perspective as the designer.
Yeah, just in a couple of plays so far, the tactical advantages that you can create out of the mobile obstacles is awesome. Like, we had scenarios where I knew that someone else's turn was coming up, so I could put obstacles in front of them rather than hiding behind them myself, trying to lock someone else in, or being like, oh, well, I need to knock them away or knock myself forward or give myself cover. There's all kinds of interesting options that you have at your disposal that you didn't even think of before when you have these mobile obstacles, which is really cool. But to me, the gem, the thing that's really going to delight people who have already been familiar with Catacombs and aren't really sure if this is like a step down for them or something that they might not be interested in, is this card system, not only does it make it fantastic to teach, and it simplifies the game in a sensible way to take it down to like this 20 to 30 minute time frame, but to me it just feels like a much more head-to-head strategy game than Catacombs has ever been in the past. It feels more like you're playing a dexterity version of maybe Magic the Gathering or something else like that. In the same vein, you're not dealing with resources in the same way, but you're still making choices about which spell, quote unquote, to cast at any given turn. And I want to know, what was the genesis, the germ of that cards in hand idea? Is that something you were kicking around originally as a concept for mainline Catacombs, or did you have another game in mind and then you realized it could integrate into a dexterity system? Where'd this come from?
I think the starting point was wanting something that was a design that was more minimal and focused and allowed people to understand a compact range of choices, but would still enable some interesting behavior as the game unfolded. And so the original idea was that we wanted to be able to explain Catacombs in a way that avoided some of the more complex edge case type rules. And we thought, well, how would we do something like that? And we thought, well, maybe, like we could give them a single board and we could give them less cards. And this is the if you like, the business driver behind this was our retailers wanting something simple that they could set up in their stores to show it off without having to get into all of the complexity of a full Catacombs 3 campaign. So that was the business side of it. And then there was the design side of it. The game itself really came together very quickly. It's obviously taken time to produce it, but the actual the core design of it, it was almost like one of these meant to be kind of designs, in that it just crystallized very quickly. I had the core game completed within about 2 days. And it was actually my challenge for myself. I said,
wow.
Okay, 24 hours, complete game. What can we do? And it turned into 48 hours. But ultimately, I was able to pull it together. Now, on the other hand, we have our much delayed card game that we're entering, into the third year developing and working on and refining. So it's each design is very, very different in the way that that they can come together. But this one was, in a lot of ways, it came together very, very easily, very naturally, and I'm actually very happy with the way that it turned out. Although it will be presented as a simpler version of Catacombs, I still think there's enough strategic nuance in there that the advanced Catacombs players will find it interesting. And at the low price point, I'm hoping that they'll basically say, well, might as well. It, like to your point about it being very portable, just take it and Night Ender, bit of a filler game for the more advanced people. But I think for people that are still getting into dexterity games and understanding what's special, hopefully, about the Catacombs world, I think it's a nice appetizer without it getting too complicated. There's certainly lots of places where we could add some additional sophistication if we wanted to take it in that direction. Mm-hmm. We could. There's some integration points that I left open, but at the moment, I like how focused the final product is.
Yeah, it's a great thing, and I don't know, maybe by the time that I have this podcast live, I'll also have a review up, or if not, then shortly thereafter on our YouTube channel. But the things that are really interesting about it to me, and something that I'd really want people to understand when going into this, and I think there was actually a Twitter question about this because I threw it out to audience questions. Let's see here. At Pastor Arod asked, how long will it take to set up / teach new players Catacombs Conquest? And from experience, just yesterday, in fact, after breakfast, our friends Jen and Zeno were here. Jen had played Catacombs before. She had not played Conquest. Zeno had never played any Catacombs games before, but he's familiar with games. And I was able to teach them the full set of rules in 5 minutes, and we were able to get the setup of the game done within, say, I don't know, an extra 2 to 3 minutes, including some overlap as we're doing some of the discussion about the game itself. And then we were able to rock and roll and finish a game in 30 minutes total with 2 new players, and then myself and Christina, my wife, all the while being assaulted at our ankles by my 3-year-old trying to distract us from actual play. So I would say that an actual game could be cut down to about 20 minutes without the 3-year-old expansion included. That was a joke.
I wasn't quite sure where you were going with that, Jack.
Well, sometimes the jokes hit, sometimes they miss. But either way, the 3-year-old normally doesn't come out during the board game nights. But we had a board game breakfast, I guess, so it worked out for us. That's what
I was puzzled about. It was like, well, you're actually cracking open Catacombs Conquest at breakfast?
Yeah, well, Zeno comes over and makes these epic breakfasts at our house now and then.
Oh, I see. So it was an epic breakfast. Okay,
yeah,
so
well, it was an epic breakfast, so we needed that. We had corned beef hash. We had, let's see, what did we have? We had some hash browns and eggs and some of this Kansas City bacon. It was far too much, but nonetheless, we figured we couldn't let Zeno go without showing him Catacombs Conquest because it seemed so right up his alley, and we hadn't had a chance to play the other Catacombs games with him yet. And it was like, dude, we have to check this out. Let's sit down and play this. And he had a great time. In fact, Jen, who had played the other Catacombs games, she was like, I want this game. This is my favorite in the line. So I think there's a certain contingent of gamer that this is going to be their perfect Catacombs, which is very cool. Now, have you thought about other cards, like other decks, other like I made the comparison earlier to something like Magic the Gathering, my history of playing tons of games and LCGs and CCGs, that's where my mind goes is, oh my God, what if I had, like an Ice Mage loadout, or I had a pool of 60 cards that I had to choose the 28 that I want to include in my deck or something like that. Is that something that's been a possibility in your mind? Have you considered that?
Yeah, sure. There's definitely scope for additional cards. The Kickstarter backers, for example, are getting some extra cards for both teams. Those will, of course, be available via our online shop.elzra.com. Mm-hmm. And there's another additional pack of content we will publish in some form, I'm sure, which again provides more cards for both teams and has both the teams start to diverge. So I think it's definitely possible that there could be more content for it. And of course, with a game like this, it's quite possible that you could end up with too many cards to draw from.
Right.
So there is a system on each card where each card is divided up into one of 5. I forget now the term that we ended up using in the manual, but I think of it from the design space, like 5 types. There's 5 types, there's 5 symbols, and you could say, okay, well, I'm going to remove this one type, and we're going to put this other type in instead. Mm-hmm. So, and there's actually 2 sets of those symbols. So there's different ways that you can arrange that. So you can say, okay, well, I'm going to go on type 1, or I can go on type 2. And again, I wasn't always directly editing the manual this time, so I haven't looked at it recently. I guess I got it sitting right here. I could probably take a look and see exactly what so people aren't confused about what I'm referring to here.
Here, we'll have like our own little seminar session here, and I'll break out my manual as well.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the character's role and the character's star sign. That's what we ended up with, right? It's their role. There's 6 of them, and the star sign, and there's another 6. So you could say, for example, well, I've got X number of leaders in my deck. Well, for integrating in new content, you could only have up to 3 leaders or something to that effect.
Right.
This would be in rules that are not published here, of course, but you then have to choose who your 3 leaders are going to be.
Yeah.
Or it might be, so that's what I call type 1. And then there's type 2, which is the star sign. That's what we ended up, the user-facing term for it was. Okay, well, you can only have a certain number of coral star sign creatures. So, that would be another, you might be able to only choose like 5 or 7 of them or something to that effect, right? So so we don't really talk about any of those concepts very much in this base game manual to keep it simple.
But the hooks
certainly
are there.
The hooks are there that you could take those unique types that are assigned to each of the characters and do something more with them.
Well, that's super cool, and that's something that actually reminds me of the Lord of the Rings LCG has a system where you form adventure decks that are constructed of things using certain symbols. So like the spiders of Mirkwood may have been in one adventure, but they were mixed with the symbol for the Gundabad orcs or something like that, and then another adventure would have those same spiders of Mirkwood but mixed with 2 different symbol types, and that kind of forms your deck, and that's actually a really clever and elegant way of handling that. But another reason why I like this game, and I feel like I'm just gushing on this game here, and a lot of it is because I really love the Catacombs universe. Not only is the art design something that I'm absolutely in love with, and I know that you give Kwanchai Moria a lot of artistic leeway in coming up with things, but you definitely give him direction on some of the things that you want to represent. But some of the narrative, the little blurb on the front of this references the event horizon from this world, and then in an alternate reality, and it is the coolest story hook that I think you've put into a Catacombs game yet. And I'm wondering, like, how, first off, do you write the narrative yourself, or is that someone else that you're working with? Because it's very well written for something so concise and small. And then 2, how much time do you spend thinking about the setting of each of these individual games and the narrative reality of the Catacombs world? Because if you looked at just the first game, you might just assume, oh, well, this is gibberish. They just came up with something, and there's no real continuity to it. But then if you start looking at it in the context of each release that you've had, there is just enough connective tissue there to show you, no, actually, a lot of this is really well thought out, or at least you've left little branching moments where you could connect things if you needed to. So how much of a storyteller are you being about this, Aron?
Well, to answer your first question, very simply, yes, I'm the one that writes the story content, and I'm actually also responsible for naming the characters and the locations and building the world and the lore and keeping it all consistent and ensuring that, if we have a particular part of the story unfold, that it makes sense that certain characters are actually there, because there's a timeline that's involved here, and some of the characters are present in some parts of the timeline and in some loosely locations, and not in others. So, regarding the story for Conquest itself, it jumps everything ahead, which is in terms of what you might colloquially call the future, in a way that might be somewhat surprising for an introductory title, because if you really follow what the story, at least the way I envision it, is suggesting is that the Catacombs world has actually already undergone a profound transformation, just as people are starting to learn about it. And the key thing is that the message behind the game, it's obviously open to interpretation, but it's not the word conquest is a deliberate one. It's not about violently overthrowing an opponent. That's a low-hanging fruit, if you like, way to understand it. But it's really about taking these characters, bringing them all together, and giving them the opportunity for reconciliation, for them to look back on the actions that they engaged in, the choices that they took in their lives, and to really come together and ultimately conquer themselves, conquer their own fears, their own maybe sense of inadequacy, and perhaps their own feelings as a result of some of the interactions that they might have had between them, and really look for that inner peace as a result of this this event that happened, the event horizon. So the event horizon happened to the Catacombs world, of SNAFU, and there will be a game that explores the nature of that phenomenon. So that's occupying, if you like, this sort of space and the gap in the narrative there. And there's that story plants some of the seeds of some of these concepts, where there may be something larger outside of this world that ultimately acts as a unifying force. Because obviously, like traveling between some of these, even just these areas, it's not just easy or arbitrary that Lara the Huntress, for example, goes from one place and ends up in the Castle's world. She's pretty intrepid that she was actually able to do that. It's not necessarily a straightforward process to be able to get from one part of this world to this isn't Tolkien, right? They don't just start walking and they cross some mountains and all that sort of thing. It's a little bit, we don't really get into a lot of the sort of physics of this place, but it's not necessarily a straightforward process. So she was able to do it. I mean, this is also, of course, ties into where we go with the Keystone and what's the Malashai, the werewolf character. What's so important about the Keystone? Well, I mean, one of the things is that it facilitates this kind of transportation, right? This is how the characters that can engage in, say, opening portals and teleporting and things of that nature, this is what's so valued with those, the chicken can teleport, right? Well, who cares, right? Well, no, the fact that he can do that is actually, pretty significant. And, we kind of play that, he's sort of a bit more of a humorous kind of character, but the fact that he can do that is pretty significant. It's not the fact that you're jumping from one place to another. So that's the kind of the sense of it. So there's this event horizon, and and I know it was based on a real life experience, by the way. So that sort of informed some of these ideas, aspects, et cetera, that actually ended up in the games themselves. There's a lot of personal material in all of the titles, lots of sort of hidden things, references, and things like that.
Well, that's the kind of stuff that I absolutely love, because looking on my right, I have a huge bookshelf full of all kinds of Marvel comics, compendiums, and everything. And I love when there's some sort of narrative explanation for even the silliest of things. So the idea that it's not inconsequential that the chicken can teleport is probably my favorite thing that you have ever told me. It just makes me all that much more in love with the Catacombs universe. But we could be talking about this all day. I would love to just talk your ear off about the Catacombs universe and the world building and the narrative and that kind of stuff. But in some ways, I don't want to spoil all of it for me. I'm waiting for those other games to come out. But something else that has always struck me about you is that you seem very interested in consumer feedback, in customer feedback, in player feedback. You've asked me my feedback at like conventions and everything, and I've watched you try and absorb what other people are thinking about your games in real time as you're playing them. And I've noticed that in looking at some of the older editions of Catacombs and what some of the revisions and reprints have done, even within the editions themselves, you've done slight tweaks and evolutions and updates to rule books and everything that don't even warrant full new editions of the game, but are little quality of life improvements. And I'm wondering, is that something that you are just constantly keeping track of all the different types of feedback that you get, and you're just brainstorming all kinds of ideas on how you can improve a game? Do you think that I don't even know exactly where I'm going with this. It just seems so unique compared to a lot of companies in the industry. And what is it that one gives you the ability to do that in such a much more frequent fashion than other companies? And two, do you have like a distinct process for how you're tracking, testing, and reincorporating a lot of this feedback that you're constantly getting?
Well, I think there's a couple of processes that would inform an answer to that question. The first is that we very much value feedback from the players. They give me a lot of their passion as to how much they're enjoying the game. And if they have ideas that are going to make the product better for everybody, I want to reciprocate with that passion, and I have the capacity to overall make it better. So, I like to read comments. I like to meet people in person. We don't like to make changes in an arbitrary fashion. But if there is a good idea that is worth considering, we certainly don't have a not invented here mentality. If people, players who are using the product, sometimes a lot more than us. I mean, sometimes, like I don't get an opportunity with all the other things that I have to deal with to actually sit down and play Catacombs as much maybe as I would like. So the people that are on the front lines that are demoing it, spreading the word, evangelizing it, or just simply enjoying the product with their families, if there's something that they found confusing, something that they found problematic, something that we can improve, I like to think that we're receptive to that. If people identify a particular component as being problematic, I'm going to do my best to replace that component. If somebody identifies a rule that seems to be perhaps unforgiving or difficult to understand, then there's an opportunity to evolve that rule so that we don't want to be intransigent about things. If the stun rules aren't fun, well, there was a desire when we first did third edition to not change too much from first and second edition. But ultimately, I was able to have my way in this particular case and update the stun rules in a way that were hopefully an improvement to the way that the game can be played and are less confusing. That's one specific example. Mm-hmm. In other cases, we didn't communicate clearly enough to people whether something was an advanced feature or not. Poison's an advanced feature. And we didn't do a good enough job of communicating that to players. So we had all these players getting poison. Oh, it's overpowered. And, I don't know about overpowered, but certainly it can be lethal in under certain circumstances. And yeah, I mean, it's important to understand that don't unleash that on brand new players prematurely. Give them the opportunity to to get into the game first. And this is one of the things that our instructional materials that we're always working on to improve. We will continue to improve the manuals for all of our published products. We're getting better at it. It's an institutional, in a way, small institutional process in a sense to understand what works and what doesn't. We've got some better capacity now for graphics. My graphic designer, Jordan Silvestri, is doing a fantastic job on the manuals and is reworking them to take elements that we've identified that work and starting to distribute those ideas, those concepts, those designs to the other ones. We're also, I think, now have an opportunity to create some animated instructional videos as well. So I don't have an exact timeline as to when these will be released, but based on some of the work that we've been doing with some of the instructional materials like the manuals, we now can take some of these assets and have an animated tutorial too. So there's lots of areas where we want to take these opportunities for improvement. Now, I said there were multiple reasons. The other key reason, of course, is that we actually have never reprinted the game with the same printer consecutively yet. So every time there's sort of a certain reality to it that every time you go to set the thing up, that if there is an area that's problematic, you do have the opportunity right there to do that remediation. Setting up the game every time is extremely time consuming. So it might as well be the very best product that you can put out there.
That makes total sense. Though, again, the collector in me, the guitar guy in me, I'm imagining that 50 years down the road, people are going to be looking at their Catacombs boxes and going like, oh, what's the serial number on this one? Oh, this was made in that warehouse. That's the good one that you want to get. They're going to be tracking down each and every individual little aspect of each of these games coming out for all the different editions. Oh, no, that one, there was some sort of shortage in ink at the time, so it changed the specific look on this one component, and it makes for a really cool rare edition of Catacombs that you can add to your collection.
Yeah, well, so for example, with the next printing that we're going to do of Catacombs, just from memory, may be corrected, of course, but I think there's been only one card change. So I don't want people to think, that this is some sort of like sinking ship or shifting sands or something like that, or it's not like that. We are trying to get to a version with a printer that can make this thing where we do just start printing it, and for the most part, some of these adjustments that we've been making will be there'll be less of them in a sense. It'll be more stability to the core game.
Right, and
that's where we'd like to get to.
The original intent of the question was definitely based around the fact that you, again, seem very consumer focused in that you are willing to be receptive to feedback and willing to make improvements upon a game. Like you said, if you're going to be printing it again, you might as well print the best possible version of the game. And I am totally confident in your ability to see this through and make sure that there is one unified copy that's going to continue to come out. But I actually admire the amount of changes and reception that you've had to in the audience, because what makes Catacombs a little bit special to me, beyond just the fact that it's a really cool dexterity game, and beyond the fact that it has these really interesting thematic hooks into a strategic game completely unlike anything else that's totally independent of text or just interpretation of symbols, that there's this whole new dimension of physicality to it. It's that it's a system that you immediately feel like a kid playing Hero Quest again for the first time, or whatever game really captured your imagination as a kid or as an adult even, where you see from the consumer perspective immediately how you can envision everything else that could be incorporated in the game. And you start imagining what are all the cool characters that weren't printed that we could create, or we could come up with suggestions. And the community has definitely done that. Like, I was just looking the other day and someone was like, what if we have a catacomb lord that was like a mobile obstacle that shot out monsters? And I was just like, wow, that's a fantastic idea. And he came up with all kinds of boards and everything to it.
I know that guy.
Yeah,
he's one of the guys. He's out of Israel.
Oh, okay.
He really likes the game.
Yeah.
So,
it's a fantastic game that allows for that sort of imaginative engagement, and I love that you have noticed that and have harnessed that the players are going to engage with this game in a different level than I think they would for a lot of games that don't necessarily feel like a system that can be expanded upon, and more of just like a self-contained box. And that's a big part of why I love it. But I definitely want to get to a couple more things. Speaking of some of the things that make Catacombs special, is Wyverns. It has come out. It's this really cool expansion. When in the process of coming out with Catacombs 3rd edition, or even predating that, was mounts something that you wanted to tackle? When did that come into the idea phase of things? And was it a challenge to actually come up with a system that worked in the way that Wyverns is actually really fun and exciting and challenging to play? Was that difficult to actually see that through as a designer?
Wyverns really got started in early 2015. I had a conceptual document that I shared with Quanshai, sort of starting to share some of the initial thinking behind it. And it accelerated in July 2015, actually during a road trip where I was able to go through some ideas and start recording some possibilities of how this could work. I already had sort of a framework for it, in the sense that I knew that they would be a completely new character type, because a wyvern has certain properties that's different from a catacomb lord, that's different from an ancient, that's different from a hero. If you strip everything away, each thing that you can have in the catacombs world has a set of attributes that you can associate with it. And so, for example, you can think of it like the ancients, it has an invulnerability bit. Well, most things in catacombs don't have the invulnerability bit set, but shields do. Mm-hmm. Wyverns apparently do, and ancients do. This is my software development background, sort of talking here now in a sense, like sort of looking at the whole holistic way that objects are, in the abstract, are represented in the system. Mm-hmm. And there's an actual chart that you can look at, by the way, that you can look at all the different attributes, and it's all sort of summarized there, and you can see which ones can do what, right? Even obstacles. Obstacles are something in the system. They just don't typically move in the case of catacombs. So anyway, so the point is I mention all of that design space side of it because it's important when you have a new character that you situate it properly amongst all of those other elements. It's going to sit there, and what behaviors are going to be enabled as a result that will give the players something new. So that was the part of it. The other part was the sort of the inspiration part of it, and I could talk a bit about that, of course. The inspiration for Wyverns, some of the mechanical parts of it came from a classic arcade game called Golden Axe.
Oh, dude, I love Golden Axe.
Yeah, who didn't? So if you were alive at that certain time, it was one of the arcade games that you really like. So if you know Golden Axe, what happens? You have the hero characters, and you have the different dragon types. And the dragons in Golden Axe are neutral. Usually the enemies would ride, or the enemy army characters, they would ride a dragon in, but if you could knock the enemy character off of the dragon, you could capture it and you could use it. They would work for either side, and past a certain point they would run away, and they may not be available anymore. And there were 3 types of dragons in the original game. So I liked this idea of them being neutral, and so I wanted to have it. So we've now talked about the sort of the abstract integration with the Catacomb system, because obviously the mechanics in Golden Axe don't directly translate into Catacombs, but they did inspire, if you like, the use of the templates, because in Golden Axe you had the different dragon types. You had a more melee-oriented dragon, the kind of the chicken dragon, and you had the one that had his flame breath, and the one that did the fireballs, and all that sort of thing. And of course, we had some of those analogs already in Catacombs. So there was an opportunity then to say, okay, well, how could we take some of those more area of effect that you would see in something like a Golden Axe and translate it over to this use of templates. And the templates also were, of course, inspired by some of the things that you'd see in Warhammer 40K as well. Yep. Like you'd have the area of effect, orbital bombardments that would come in and things of that nature. And I didn't want anything too complex like that. There's quite a lot of complexity to some of the orbital bombardment things you can get into with Warhammer and things. And of course, their rule sets have evolved over the years, and just different things you can do with them. But I wanted to sort of share a bit of a flavor of what we were thinking of with this. And the key thing was that we didn't want it to be a bookkeeping exercise, that we didn't want people to have to manage a dragon. We wanted people to ride a dragon, not manage it. So we didn't want a lot of stats. And, well, does the dragon have stats now? Oh, that's a pain. Now I've got to have a little player board. I got to track the stats of the dragon and all of this sort of thing, right? So, let's just have them where they're invulnerable. They're truly neutral, and we can introduce them into the game in different ways. We can have it where the heroes start with it. We can have, for Catacombs 3, for example, some new elements like the eggs and things like that. There was the Wyvern Familiar too, was kind of like a little nod to bringing some of those the templates into the item space as well. Mm-hmm. There was a number of different possibilities there, but I wanted something where you could feel like you were powering them up so that you could unlock some interesting, different capabilities, some new things that we hadn't seen before. But at the same time, I wanted to keep the bookkeeping to a minimum. I think I had a system at one point where you could only ride the dragon for a certain amount of time. You would actually have to kind of track it, and then you could get certain ability cards that would improve your score. So that would mean to say that you could add to this track, you could expand the track, meaning you could ride it longer. So the Wyvern Rider, she's not called the Wyvern Rider in that game. That's always just how I refer to her. She's that in the Conquest game, but we're back in the past before she's actually done it, become a Wyvern Rider. That's where we are in the Wyvern set. But anyway, so I was thinking about this different system, but again, too much bookkeeping, too much complexity, and that's how we ultimately arrived at the idea of the Wyvern Claws. And you collect the Wyvern Claws, and you can cash them in, and if you execute that special Wyvern Strike, there's something different about that in a sense. You still get to do an attack, and you still get to potentially collect a claw. And every Wyvern can do that. Because if you start having it, well, this one's got a Wyvern Strike here, and this one's got a Wyvern Strike over there, well, that gets problematic. You're immediately into balancing issues then. Everyone's got to have the equal opportunity to be able to have access to it. And that's how that first action for each of the Wyverns is always the ability to be able to have the potential anyway of collecting a Wyvern Claw.
I am so glad that you didn't set all the wyverns on a timer. That would have been a nightmare and would also undermine the most fun aspect of the wyverns, which is riding them. If I had to be bummed out because I couldn't keep them, then that would have been a complete bummer.
And I would just say one other thing about it is that, the Golden Axe reference is the reason, of course, that Beeble gets the rune axe, and the reason that is so powerful. It ultimately is one of those little shadow things that I tend to embed inside of Catacombs. One of those references when you're growing up. There's also the 2000 AD comic character Slain, and his comment, they'd always do "kiss my axe," right?
Yep.
So those two references are right in there with Beeble. Hey, I know it's powerful, being a permanent, but he goes from being one of the worst characters to one of the best, and it's a bit of a sort of tongue-in-cheek enjoyment as a result, right? He's awesome. He's awesome that way because Golden Axe was awesome.
Right. And I'm seeing it all come together. And I'll say he is one of the best, but you still have to make choices about what you do. And if you declare that you're using the rune axe to start with and you move using that ability and you're not within range, then it's like, oh man, I guess that didn't really do much for me. So you still are making interesting decisions, and it's not overpowered by any means. But that's the cool kind of stuff, again, that Catacombs can really bring to the table, is that you're coming up with interesting ways of tackling really complicated concepts using physicality as a descriptor, as a definition for how these things are working. Like the first time that I saw ice, like an ice shot work in Catacombs, I was immediately sold. Like, this is 100% a game that I want to play and see how it tries to tackle every sort of different classic fantasy trope in just a dexterity system, because ultimately it becomes so simple. It either works or it doesn't. Like, there's no rolling dice to have a probability of whether an arrow hits or not. It truly just, it works or it doesn't. Does this cover actually work? Well, instead of having like a page and a half of rules about how cover and popping around cover to fire works, it either does cover you by effectively protecting you from some sort of shot, or it doesn't. It just seems so simple and elegant in really great ways. And I'm wondering if there are any classic fantasy tropes that you have just desperately wanted to come up with some sort of dexterity solution for, and you haven't yet. Like, is there one nut that you're still trying to crack?
I think the answer to that question is vehicles. So that's a kind of a generic way of looking at it. But if we were to take something like an orc battle wagon, something like that, how do you have a vehicle on the battlefield? Well, we've got wyverns now; they've got a single rider. But I'd actually like to have it where you could have a vehicle, and then you've got characters inside of it somehow, and you could actually flick the vehicle. And then you could have maybe little goblins come out of it or something like that. Or for larger vehicles, you actually have a separate vehicle card, kind of like the teleport card or the devoured card, that you put the occupants of the vehicle off to the side on that card, and you're just using the vehicle to move around. So that's I've also thought about like war mammoths, for example. That's another one that I've chatted with Quanshai about in the past, right? Maybe he'll draw me a war mammoth one day. We'll see. But that sort of thing is interesting to me.
You'll have to save the war mammoth for the Tundra expansion. But before the interview started, Aaron and I were just talking, because there is a before the interview for all of you out there. There is sometimes a little bit of before the interview, and I was telling him that he needs to get around to making the Great Northern expansion to Catacombs. So maybe that war mammoth will come into play there.
Yeah, who knows? There's certainly that possibility, but that would be one of them. I think there's more that we can potentially do with the with the templates. I like the template implementation right now, and we don't want to undermine the dexterity nature of the game. But I've got some interesting ideas about what we could potentially do with those.
Well, I think that's a good way to transition to this. So, what's on the horizon for Elzra, Catacombs or otherwise?
Well, I mean, what's on the horizon is hopefully a printer that can make the game properly. That would be fantastic. Catacombs Conquest is, of course, a good start in that direction. That's obviously goodness. We have a few projects that are in various stages of release. I've spoken before about the Catacombs card game. We were close at the end of 2017 to a release, and we had the box, we had the manual, the components, we had everything basically ready to go to print along with Conquest. And my feeling is that it could still use some more work. So Ryan and I, Ryan Amos is the designer of the first and second edition of Catacombs. What Mark Kelsey, myself, Ryan, we're all still friends. We're all co-designers of the original game. This is a project that I'm working on with him. It's his idea, and we just felt that maybe it's because it is a card game. And there may be some other elements as well, but it started as a card game at its core, that it might be better to have it completely re-illustrated in a new fashion. Okay? And this is to prevent confusion in the marketplace with Catacombs Monster Pit. People see Quan Chai, they see the Catacombs name, they probably assume that it's a dexterity title. That's right. That's the ball rolling down the hill assumption, the reasonable one that they would make. So my thinking now is that Catacombs Monster Pit, and I'm sure that the description on BGG, for example, contradicts this at the moment, because we were so close to having this release. I'm looking at it being another dexterity style game that befits that fantastic cover that Quan Chai Moria painted for it. So we have some artistic resources in mind for the Catacombs card game, which now again goes now without a name. So it hasn't, but it's there as a design, and I'm very committed to publishing it. And so is Ryan. We met about it last week, for example. Catacombs Monster Pit, I've got some interesting ideas for, and I'd like to have briefly a one versus many type encounter that's self-contained, as envisioned at the moment, and so it's not an expansion, and has some other dexterity type ideas that I've been playing with. And it's there's a certain simpatico with the illustrations that Quan Chai has done, and this new design that I had percolating for some time. So in a way, we've rearranged the stage a bit, and that's the status of those two products. A third one is our first external design. This is Ken Vale's design for Catacombs Cubes. He's from Cambridge, Ontario, just up the highway from us here. He's got a very interesting structural type game, if you like. This was first demoed at Boston Fig in September last year, and Ken has been iteratively testing it. And what you're essentially doing is there's a dexterity component to it in the sense that you're building three-dimensional structures. But there's some other elements that are going on there that are quite different and unique and interesting. And actually, we'll mean to say that we'll have like a non-flicking game, if you like, in our category. So for people that sit there and immediately say, "Oh, flicking, I don't want to do flicking," there'll be something here We hope that they change their mind about the flicking, of course, and at least give it a go. But it can be a lot of fun. But that this is something that's definitely nothing to do with flicking. And the last one that I'll mention is I'll just hint at it. Is there was the rights to a pretty successful design reverted to the designer, and we've had some constructive conversations about bringing that back, and that'll be
wow.
a very so I'm not going to say too much more about that now, but it's been out of print, and it's one of these ones that's difficult to get a hold of, and we're looking to do something with that.
Well, that is certainly extremely exciting. I did want to hit just one more Twitter question, and then I got something to kind of take us out of here. So this Twitter question, this might be another like hold you to the wall question here. So feel free to answer to your heart's content. But at the Giant Brain asks, when is Catacombs going to be available in the UK again?
That's a good question. First of all, as I said, we're doing our best to support the UK market. We know we have a lot of people interested in the from the UK and in Catacombs. We are planning to attend the UK Games Expo this year to get a feel for what that show's like, and to meet some of the people that are interested in what we're doing. The reality of it is that we have to get it into distribution over there. And we have distribution channels available to us. The question will be whether we have enough stock to supply to them. So the stock that we have, in a way, thank goodness we didn't print more given some of the challenges that we've experienced. But if I had to guess, once it's broadly available to the US and Canadian distributors, and probably some of the Australian ones as well, they're going to take a pretty significant bite out of that inventory and take it all off of our hands. To give you a sense, when we last came to retail distribution, we sold out at wholesale of Catacombs 3E within 24 hours. So that was pretty remarkable. It was obviously we don't take that for granted. But the key takeaway here is that we know that the UK market is one that we want to support. So it's definitely an area of growth for us. For those that don't know, I was actually born in the UK. I transplanted from London, England to Canada with my family when I was a child. But have a British passport, and so we and I visited the country on. I've been fortunate to visit on a number of occasions. So, and all my family is back there. So there's definitely ties to the country, and there's a definite strong impetus for us to support it. The best thing I think at this point is I helped out a gentleman from the UK recently. Just get in touch with us via our online shop, and I'm willing to work pricing on shipping you a copy directly from us here in Canada. That's something that I did, like I said, for a gentleman the other day. We absorbed some of the shipping cost on his behalf so that we could get a copy to him. And that may ultimately be the most expeditious way to do it. And I will add that buying directly from us, at least where we stand at the moment with this massive remediation challenge and limited number of copies at distribution, it really helps us out. We're a small business, family business. Every dollar that comes in through the door that are direct sales, obviously we don't want to undercut our retail partners. But in the short term, while we don't even have any of that inventory available to them anyway, every dollar that comes in is really, really appreciated, sincerely, because it really helps us out and keeps the lights on and keeps things moving forward. Shop.elzra.com.
Well, that's a great way of hooking up your UK fans, the people who want to play it over there. And I wanted to exit this with just asking you if there's one property, because you were talking about Golden Axe, you were talking about 2000 AD, and I know that in the last time that we've talked to you, you've talked about some of the things that have inspired you. Is there one property that if you could capture the tone of and work somehow into a Catacombs set, some intellectual property, some licensed property. I'm not saying you're actually setting it in there, but one that you could just take the oeuvre of and work it into some sort of Catacombs expansion or game or whatever, what would that be?
Well, there's a couple of possibilities there. And by the way, there are some other products that we're working on that do have licenses, for example, that I'm under non-disclosure that I can't necessarily mention. And they're not necessarily Catacombs ones, but they do use the system, for example. But, if I had to pick something in sort of a similar vein as Magic Sword, it was Golden Axe, would be Magic Sword.
Yeah, there you go.
If I had to pick one in the same vein as Golden Axe, it would be Magic Sword. That would be interesting to do. In Magic Sword, you've got all the different scenes, you've got a lot of different monsters, and I like the idea of being able to find the different characters that you could unlock, you could upgrade. It's a sort of hidden maze type mechanic where you can navigate through different parts of the tower and things of that nature. So something like Magic Sword would be kind of cool.
Well, that's something for everyone to dig up in the past, and anyone who hasn't played Golden Axe needs to go out and check that out too. And the little known Golden Axe Game Gear game, I had that as a kid. You need to play that as well, but really stick with the arcade version, because the Game Gear one's going to run you 6 AAA batteries in about 2 minutes. So maybe you shouldn't bother with that one. But it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Aron. And for those of you in the audience who haven't actually checked out Catacombs, but you've stuck it through all of this wonderful Catacombs discussion, then you can go to our YouTube channel, and we have reviews of Catacombs 3rd Edition, Catacombs and Castles, as well as the Wyverns and Cavern of Soloth expansions. And then I'll have a review up soon of Catacombs Conquest. It may be up by the time that you are actually listening to this, so check all those out there. And then, Aron, where did you say that people can find you and all sorts of direct from the source Catacombs goodness?
Elzra.com, of course, is our website with links to our online store, shop.elzra.com. By the way, all of your videos are featured as on the various product pages as well. So if you go to look up about Catacombs and Castles, for example, your review along with other reviewers from the community are also there. So people get a nice overview about how the different products work. Of course, Facebook.com/Catacombs Game, Twitter.com/Catacombs Game for the product-specific side of things. And if you want to follow what Elzra is doing just as a company, conventions and things of that nature, Facebook.com/Elzra Games, Twitter.com/Elzra Games.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much once again, Aron, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jack. Always a pleasure chatting to you as well. And hopefully we can chat again at some point.
I know we will. As always, the Cardboard Herald is a completely free service providing you with interviews, reviews, and recommendations. You can find all of our stuff at cardboardherald.com or check out all of our regular content on our YouTube channel. If you are interested in contributing, have some feedback, or just want your listener mail read on air, click the contact link on our site. If you enjoyed this episode on our interview feed, check out our sister podcast, TCbH Reviews, where we give you audio versions of our reviews, followed by a look behind the scenes of what went into making them. Lastly, this episode was edited and produced by Rob Conley of Ginger Cat Productions. Have a new audio project you need help with? Whether it's music or podcasting, Ginger Cat Productions can help you out. Find them at gcatproductions.com. Once again, thank you for listening. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald, and you keep on gaming.